The ballroom glowed beneath hundreds of tiny lights strung across the ceiling, as if a slice of night sky had been stitched into silk and hung overhead. Crystal vases caught the sparkle and scattered it across white tablecloths. The string quartet in the corner poured out a gentle waltz that floated like perfume above the soft murmur of conversation. Waiters threaded the aisles with the grace of dancers, balancing trays of champagne that fizzed like bottled laughter. It was the kind of wedding where every detail came rehearsed and polished, perfect, expensive, forgettable. Lucas Amaral moved through it like a man who had been here 1,000 times. The suit was custom, the tie a shade of midnight that painters would envy, and the expression on his face the one he wore in boardrooms, composed, attentive, untouchable. He shook hands, nodded at names he barely registered, returned compliments with the precision of a metronome. Another night of social arithmetic, a contact, subtract an hour of sleep, multiply your advantage. He was reaching for a flute of champagne when something knifed through his focus. At first it felt like a trick of light, a ripple in the crowd. Then he saw her far back, close to one of the pillar-wrapped tables, a little removed from the main current of the party. The dress was simple in a room addicted to spectacle, a quiet black that made her skin glow warm and alive. Her hair framed, her face the way it used to when mornings still mattered. Marina. The name rose inside him before he could choose it. Marina, like a breath held too long. The room seemed to tilt, the quartet dimming to a thin thread of sound. It had been years, enough time for a man to rebuild a life, enough time to convince himself he wasn't looking over his shoulder anymore. And yet there she was, as unignorable as a scar. He might have convinced himself to look away. He had learned to do that with difficult things, except she wasn't alone. 2 teenagers sat with her, laughter still clinging to their faces. One nudged the other in the shoulder, with the kind of easy cruelty only brothers survive. They were tall and rangy, somewhere between boy and man, all elbows and confidence. And when one of them turned his head to listen, Lucas's heart stumbled. The eyes, hazel brown with that little flash of green when the light caught just right. His eyes, he told himself, it was a coincidence. Cities are full of echoes. You see your jawline in a stranger, your hands in an old photograph in a shop window. He studied them again, cataloguing, dismissing, returning. The slope of the nose not exact, but close. The smile, there it was, the half-crooked quirk that carried more mischief than apology. The posture relaxed, as if chairs were merely suggestions. Familiarity gathered around them like static, and suddenly his skin felt too tight. How old? He started counting backwards, numbers turning heavy as stones. 15, 16. The years lined up like evidence. He tried to be rational. He lifted the champagne to his mouth and found his hand unsteady, set the glass down untouched. The quartet slid into a new melody. Conversation swelled and receded like a tide. He could have walked away. There were people here expecting him to be the version of Lucas that never shook, never faltered. Instead, he stared like a man studying a horizon for a ship he wasn't sure he wanted to see. Marina felt his eyes. He knew the exact moment. Her laughter paused in mid-air. Her shoulders drew in a fraction. She turned, almost carefully, as if the motion might break something fragile, and found him. The years between them telescoped into a single second. He expected anger, maybe the old heat that had fueled their final argument. What he saw was steadier, layered recognition, caution, a strength he didn't remember having the words to. Honor when he was younger. She didn't wave. She didn't look away quickly either. She acknowledged him with the smallest incline of her chin, the kind you give to a truth you wish would be haven't. Then she returned to the boys. One said something that made her smile again, a soft, protective curve. The smile grazed him, like a memory of warmth in a cold room. He pivoted, intending to vanish into the safer noise of a conversation about venture funds. But his feet refused to learn new choreography. From his angle, he noticed smaller things, the details that always broke his armor. The way one boy tapped a finger on the table. Steady, precise. Lucas's nervous tick in every meeting since he was 16. The other's habit of pushing his hair back with the same distracted sweep Lucas used when thoughts crowded too fast. It was absurd, he told himself. It was compelling. It was both at once, and the confusion made his chest ache. He remembered the last door slam, how the echo crawled into his bones and stayed. Remembered the look in Marina's eyes, hurt, wrapped around a hard point he couldn't blunt with promises. He remembered being so sure of the road ahead that he never checked who he was leaving on the shoulder. A toast was called. Crystal chimed like frost. People turned, bodies creating momentary corridors and walls. In the shifting, Marina's profile sharpened against the light. One of the boys leaned in to whisper, and she rested a hand on his shoulder without thinking, automatic, tender, absolute. The kind of touch children grow up inside. Lucas realized he had stopped breathing. He let the air in slowly, felt the burn of it. This night had arrived with a neat itinerary. Now it was a door he couldn't close. He wasn't ready for answers, but questions had already made a home in him. He straightened his tie, a useless gesture that gave his hands a job. Somewhere a laugh burst too loud. Somewhere a camera flashed and captured a joy that would look better in pictures than memory. He stood unmoving in a river of movement and understood with clean, terrifying clarity. He had come for business, but he would leave changed. Whether he wanted to or not, Lucas stayed near the back of the ballroom, his body present but his mind orbiting far from the polite hum of champagne-fueled conversations. From here, he could see Marina's table clearly enough to catch fragments of her laughter, the way her head tilted when she listened, the casual, wordless rhythm between her and the two boys. Every so often, he'd lose sight of them in the ebb and flow of guests drifting across the floor, but the moment they came into view again, his focus locked, as if pulled by an invisible thread. He knew he was in dangerous territory. If he let himself, he could justify marching across the room right now, demanding answers. He could claim his right to know, to understand. But part of him was afraid that what he suspected was true, and equally afraid that it wasn't. Either way, the ground beneath his feet was shifting. The music softened as a toast began. Everyone turned toward the head table, glasses raised, smiles rehearsed. Lucas mirrored the motion, his eyes fixed on the champagne flute in his hand. The last time he and Marina had spoken, it hadn't been in rooms like this. It had been in their apartment, years ago, walls trembling under the weight of their voices. That night still lived in the folds of his memory. Her accusing him of putting business before everything. Him accusing her of not understanding what it took to build something lasting. The way she had looked at him like someone recognizing a stranger where their partner used to stand. And then, without warning, she was gone. No long goodbyes, no chance to bargain. Just silence. He had told himself she left because they were incompatible. Oil and water, fire and ice. Two stubborn people headed in opposite directions. But now, staring at those boys, the math didn't add up. It wasn't just nostalgia that had crept in, it was suspicion. Cold, sharp, undeniable. A waiter appeared beside him, offering a tray of bite-sized hors d'oeuvres. Lucas took one without looking, grateful for something to do with his hands. He wasn't nervous in the way lesser men were. He had faced hostile takeovers, multi-million-dollar negotiations, public scrutiny. But this was different. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about truth, and truth had teeth. Across the room, Marina's laughter floated toward him again. It wasn't quite the same as he remembered, softer at the edges. Maybe tempered by time, but it still carried that warmth that used to disarm him in the middle of an argument. He caught himself staring too long, and this time, one of the boys caught him. The kid tilted his head, studying him with an openness that made Lucas's stomach clench. Before Lucas could even manage a small nod, Marina leaned in, saying something that made the boy look away. The officiant's voice rose above the chatter, drawing everyone's attention to the couple. Lucas sat at his assigned table only over from hers, close enough now to catch details he'd missed earlier. The way one boy adjusted his cufflinks like a man preparing for a meeting. The other's subtle finger drumming along the edge of his plate, keeping time with the music. Little things, but they hit Lucas like quiet confessions. He had done those same things 1,000 times without realizing they were habits. The ceremony continued, applause breaking at the right cues, glasses clinking like bells. But for Lucas, the room had narrowed to a single point: the woman he had once called his wife, and the two strangers who might carry his blood. He couldn't pretend the resemblance was chance anymore. He couldn't pretend the years between them erased the possibility. As the newlyweds shared their first dance, Marina turned her head just slightly. Their eyes met not for long, but long enough, and in that brief exchange, Lucas felt the unspoken acknowledgement. She knew exactly what he was thinking, and that meant only one thing. She had been expecting this moment for a long time. The music swelled, wrapping the ballroom in a golden haze. Guests swayed on the dance floor, clinking glasses and laughing over old memories. To everyone else, it was the perfect wedding night. To Lucas, it felt like the stage was narrowing, spotlighting only two people, himself and Marina. It happened not in some grand, cinematic moment, but in the quiet space between toasts and dancing. The groom's brother had just finished a joke that sent a ripple of laughter through the crowd. Marina's head turned slightly, as if she were scanning the room, and then her gaze locked on his. The connection was immediate, sharp, and unyielding. It wasn't a casual glance across a crowded room. It was recognition, the kind that ignored time and distance. Lucas felt it like a current, a live wire pulled taut between them. Every sound around him dulled, as though the strings and chatter had faded to a single hum in the background. Her eyes were exactly as he remembered, deep, steady, full of things she never said aloud. But there was something new there too, a guardedness, a wall he couldn't see over yet. Back then, she used to look at him like she could read his mind. Now, she looked at him like she was choosing whether to let him exist in hers. Lucas's throat felt dry. 15 years of silence, and suddenly, without speaking a word, they were standing in the same storm. The weight of it pressed on his chest. Then the shift came. One of the boys leaned toward her, whispering something. Marina's lips curved in a brief, restrained smile, but her eyes flicked back to Lucas. The look wasn't hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was measured, careful, and it confirmed what he already suspected. She knew exactly what he was wondering, and she knew he wasn't going to let it go. The rest of the toast passed in fragments. People clapped, glasses clinked, a waiter refilled his champagne, but Lucas barely registered any of it. His mind replayed that locked gaze over and over, each replay drawing the same conclusion: she was hiding something, and that something was tied to him. When the formalities ended, guests began to scatter, some to dance, others to cluster in small groups. Marina stood, smoothing the front of her dress, and excused herself. From the table, the boys moved toward the dessert area, leaving her momentarily alone. Lucas's pulse kicked harder. This was it, the opening. 15 years ago, he'd let her walk away without demanding the whole truth. Tonight, he wouldn't make that mistake again. He wove through the crowd, careful but steady, avoiding overly chatty acquaintances. Every step seemed louder than the music, as if the room was holding its breath. Marina noticed him coming almost instantly. Her shoulders squared subtly, and her jaw set. It wasn't fear, it was readiness. She knew a conversation was about to happen, and it would be one they couldn't easily walk back from. When he reached her, they didn't greet each other. With forced small talk, "Marina," he said, his voice low, steady. "Lucas." Her tone was even, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. His name felt heavier in her voice than it had the day they married. They stood there for a beat. No pretense, no scripted politeness. He could see the flicker of questions in her eyes, mirrored perfectly by the questions in his. "Can we talk?" he asked, the words more of a statement than a request. She glanced toward the boys, then back at him. "Not here." "Then tell me where," he replied without missing a beat. Her lips pressed together, and for a second he thought she'd walk away. Instead, she exhaled slowly. "Outside. Garden." As she stepped past him, leading the way, Lucas knew the moment had arrived. Whatever happened out there, under the quiet and the lantern light, would decide what kind of night and what kind of future this would be. Lucas followed at a measured distance, not wanting to seem like he was chasing her through the crowd. He told himself to stay calm, to not let emotion take over, but that was like telling a fire to stay small once it's already found dry wood. Every step toward the garden door, every glimpse of Marina's silhouette against the warm ballroom light, only made his pulse pound harder. Before they reached the exit, a group of guests intercepted Marina with cheerful greetings. Lucas slowed his pace, staying just far enough away to avoid intruding, but close enough to keep her in sight. And that's when his eyes drifted back toward the dessert table, to the two boys. From this distance, he could watch without the shield of small talk or polite introductions. He leaned against a pillar, letting the noise of the room blur. While he studied them, it didn't take long before the similarities began to shout at him in ways no polite denial could quiet. The first boy, the one who had been tapping the table earlier, now stood with one hand in his pocket, the other holding a plate as he talked to a server. Lucas had seen that exact stance 100 times in his own reflection, usually in moments when he was half focused on a conversation and half thinking ahead. His posture carried the same casual authority Lucas had been told he exuded since he was a teenager. The second boy was different, quieter, more observant, but when he smiled at something his brother said, Lucas's breath caught. It was his smile, the lopsided pull to one side, the brief flash of teeth, the way it softened the eyes for just a second before vanishing. Lucas could remember photographs of himself at that age, wearing that same expression without even trying. He noticed other things too, little habits that had no reason to be there unless blood was involved. The way the taller one tilted his head while listening, just like Lucas did in meetings. The way the other boy adjusted his wristwatch, tapping the glass once as if to check the time, a habit Lucas had developed from his grandfather. None of it could be chalked up to coincidence anymore. He began to do the math again, ages, timelines, the last time he'd seen Marina. It was a cruel calculation, each year a silent accusation. 15, 16. The numbers fit too perfectly. He had missed not just birthdays, but whole lifetimes. First words, first steps, scraped knees, school plays, late-night talks, all gone, all without him. And yet, despite the sting, something else pushed through, a strange, aching pride. These boys, whether they acknowledged him or not, carried pieces of him. It was there, in their expressions, their stance, even in the subtle confidence that seemed to anchor them in the room. One of them laughed, a full, easy laugh that made his eyes shine, and for a second, Lucas was back in his own youth, hearing his friends tell him he had a laugh that made other people join, in whether they wanted to or not. He almost smiled. Almost. Then Marina's voice pulled him back. She had finished her conversation and was now walking toward the garden doors. The boys didn't notice him watching. They were too busy teasing each other about something. Lucas turned away just before she glanced in his direction, careful not to give her the satisfaction of catching him staring. But he knew she knew. She had seen him looking at them before, and she could probably guess exactly what he was thinking now. And the truth was, Lucas didn't need a DNA test. The proof was already in front of him, breathing, laughing, alive. The only thing left was for her to admit it. The garden doors were just ahead, framed by heavy curtains that swayed gently with the air from the ballroom. Lucas could feel the bass of the music vibrating faintly through the floor, but it was fading under the thrum of his own heartbeat. This was it, the line between suspicion and truth, between a decade and a half of silence and whatever came next. Marina stepped outside first, the soft glow of lanterns washing over her face. She paused for a moment, drawing in the cooler, night air, her arms wrapping loosely around herself. Lucas hesitated in the doorway, watching her silhouette against the garden's quiet backdrop. For a man who'd closed deals worth millions without a tremor, it was almost laughable how much weight his feet seemed to carry now. He stepped forward, gravel crunched under his polished shoes. She turned slightly, hearing him approach, her expression unreadable, not hostile, not welcoming, just braced. "Marina," he said, his voice lower than he expected, steady, but threaded with something heavier. She met his gaze, and for a second, neither of them spoke. Then, "Lucas." She said his name evenly, but there was history in it, years of unspoken things compressed into 2 syllables. "I need to talk to you," he began. "Not tomorrow, not another time, now." Her eyes flicked toward the ballroom, then toward the garden path that led further into the quiet. "This isn't the place." "Then make it the place," he countered, his tone firmer than he intended. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether he was worth even that much. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Fine, out here." They moved further down the path, away from the door where curious eyes might linger. The lanterns cast soft pools of light on the stone benches and flower beds, their glow broken by the shadows of leaves swaying in the breeze. Up close, it was impossible to pretend this was a casual reunion. Her posture was guarded, shoulders slightly tense, chin lifted, the stance of someone ready to defend themselves if needed. He could feel the weight of years pressing between them, the gap carved out by absence and choices neither of them could undo. "I saw them," Lucas said finally, his voice controlled but edged with something sharper. "The boys, there." "Stop." Her interruption was quiet, but it carried authority. "Not here, not like this. I'm not leaving without answers," he replied, each word deliberate. "You can tell me I'm wrong, you can tell me they're not mine, but you won't tell me nothing." Marina's gaze didn't waver. but he could see the faintest flicker in her eyes, something caught between defiance and fatigue. "This conversation will change everything," she warned. "It already has," Lucas said. For a few seconds, the only sound was the rustle of leaves. Then she exhaled, a slow, resigned breath. "All right, let's talk." And in that moment, Lucas knew the night was about to cross a point of no return, and whatever truths came next would not be easy to hear. The garden was a pocket of calm compared to the humming energy of the ballroom. Lantern light shimmered off dew-speckled leaves, and the faint scent of jasmine drifted through the cool air. Somewhere behind them, the muffled laughter of wedding guests carried faintly, but out here, the world felt narrowed to just the two of them. Marina stood near a low stone bench, arms still folded, her gaze fixed on the path at her feet. Lucas approached slowly, stopping a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her, but unwilling to let distance dilute the moment. "You haven't changed much," she said without looking up, her tone flat but not entirely unkind. "Still walking like you own the ground you're standing on." He allowed himself a wry, humorless smile. "And you've changed completely. You're hiding something from me, Marina. And I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." Her eyes flicked to his, then away again. "Lucas, they're mine, aren't they?" The question came out sharper than he intended, but there was no point in softening it. The words hung in the air like a blade. She froze, her shoulders tightening. For a moment, the only sound was the faint rustle of leaves overhead. Then, with a slow exhale, she looked at him directly. Yes, it was only one word, but it landed, like a punch to the chest. He had suspected it from the moment he saw them, but hearing it confirmed stripped away any last barrier of doubt. "Why?" His voice cracked slightly, not with anger, but with the weight of years lost. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her gaze dropped to her hands, fingers gripping the edge of the bench. "When I found out I was pregnant, you were already somewhere else, not physically gone, but absent. You were living for the next deal, the next meeting, the next climb. I thought if I told you, it would just become another thing you'd try to escape from." "That's not fair," he said, taking a step closer. "You didn't give me the choice. You decided for me." Her head lifted sharply, a flicker of fire in her eyes. "And what would you have chosen, Lucas? Be honest, you were already halfway out the door. You think I wanted to raise them alone? You think I wanted them to grow up without their father? I did what I thought would protect them." He didn't answer immediately. Her words cut deeper than he wanted to admit because, in part, they were true. Back then, he had been obsessed with building his empire, convinced that love could wait until after success, but knowing that didn't make the loss sting any less. "You stole years from me," he said quietly. "From them, from all of us." Marina's jaw tightened, but her voice softened. "And I can't give them back, but I can protect them. Now, if you're here just to make yourself feel better, Lucas, don't bother." His chest tightened. "I'm not here for me. I'm here because they're my sons, and I want to be in their lives, whatever it takes." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching for cracks in his resolve. Finally, she gave a small nod, as if testing his sincerity. "If you mean that, you'll have to prove it, not to me, to them." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Then tell me how to start." And for the first time since the night began, Marina's guarded expression shifted, not to warmth, but to something almost like reluctant hope. The walk back toward the ballroom was heavier than Lucas had anticipated. Each step seemed to carry the weight of what had just been said, the years they couldn't get back, the truth now hanging between them like a fragile glass that could shatter at the wrong word. He wasn't nervous in the way he used to be before sealing a deal. This was different. This was personal in a way that made every muscle in his body hyper-aware. Marina slowed as they approached a quieter corner of the room. The boys were there, leaning casually against a high table, plates of half-eaten cake in front of them. They were laughing, teasing each other over something, completely unaware of the conversation that had just taken place in the garden. Lucas's pulse quickened. He had imagined meeting them before, in countless ways, sometimes in a planned, controlled setting, sometimes by accident, but never like this, never with the air thick from so many unspoken years. Marina turned to him, her voice low. "They deserve to hear it from me, not you." He nodded. "All right, but I'm standing right here." Her eyes narrowed slightly, gauging him, then she called softly, "Liam, Noah, can you come here for a minute?" The boys looked up. Liam, the taller and more reserved of the two, approached first. Noah followed. Curiosity etched across his face. They glanced at Lucas politely, the way you do with someone your mother clearly knows but hasn't introduced properly. "This is Lucas," Marina began, "an old friend." "Hi," Noah said, offering a small, cautious smile. Liam gave a short nod, his eyes flicking between Marina and Lucas, as if trying to piece together the context. "It's good to meet you both," Lucas said, keeping his tone light, though his chest felt tight. "I've heard a lot about you." A lie, but one he told himself was harmless for now. There was a brief, awkward pause. Then Noah tilted his head, studying him more closely. "You look kinda like us." Lucas couldn't help the faint smile that tugged at his mouth. "Yeah, I've noticed that too." Marina's lips pressed together, her eyes dropping for a moment before lifting again. She took a breath, as though steadying herself for a cliff jump. "There's a reason for that," she said, her voice calm but deliberate. "Lucas is your father." The words hit the air with a weight that seemed to slow time. Liam's eyes widened, his brows knitting together. Noah blinked, his mouth opening slightly before closing again. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The hum of the wedding around them seemed impossibly distant. It was Liam who broke the silence. "If this is true, where were you?" Lucas's throat tightened. "Far from where I should have been," he said honestly, "and I can't change that. But I'm here now, and if you'll let me, I want to be in your lives, no matter how long it takes." The boys exchanged a glance. It wasn't warm acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. There was hesitation in their eyes, but also something else, curiosity, maybe even the smallest crack in the wall between them. Neither of them walked away. And for Lucas, in that moment, that felt like the first small victory in a journey he knew would demand everything he had to give. That night, long after the wedding had ended and the last glasses had been cleared away, Lucas stood alone in his penthouse. The city stretched out beneath him, towers blinking with red lights, streets glowing with the pulse of headlights, and street lamps. Normally, this view steadied him. Tonight, it was nothing but a backdrop to the storm in his mind. He set a glass of whiskey on the table without drinking it. The weight in his chest had nothing to do with alcohol, and everything to do with the two faces that kept replaying behind his eyes. Liam's guarded stare, Noah's quick, searching curiosity. The way their eyes, his eyes, held a mirror to a life he'd never lived. For years, Lucas had prided himself on control, the kind of control that wins impossible negotiations, that keeps emotions neatly tucked away where they can't cloud judgment. But now, control felt like an illusion. All it took was a look from them, a question from Liam, and his carefully built armor had cracked wide open. He thought about all the milestones he'd missed, not in abstract terms, but in vivid, painful detail. He imagined Liam's first soccer game, Noah's first time riding a bike without training wheels, school projects glued together late at night, birthdays with mismatched candles, sick days spent under blankets watching cartoons. All of it had unfolded without him, like an entire movie played in another theater he'd never been allowed into. Part of him still wanted to be angry at Marina for deciding on her own, for denying him the choice, for building a life for them that had no space for him. But the harder truth was impossible to ignore. She had been right about who he was. Back then, he'd been consumed with building his empire, chasing every deal as if it were life or death. If he'd stayed, would he have truly been there? Or would he have been the kind of father who's present in name only, absent in every way that mattered? That question gnawed at him more than the years lost. Lucas moved to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass. Down below, people were moving, couples holding hands, friends laughing, strangers crossing paths without knowing each other's stories. He thought about how easily his own children could have been just that to him, strangers, and how easily they still could be if he didn't do something now. He realized then that this wasn't going to be something he could fix with a grand gesture. Money couldn't buy the time he'd lost, and charm wouldn't win trust overnight. This was going to be the longest, hardest negotiation of his life, one that couldn't be closed with a contract, only with patience. He glanced at his phone on the counter, Marina's number still saved after all these years. He didn't call. This conversation couldn't happen over the phone. It had to be face to face, every word backed by proof. In that quiet, Lucas made himself a promise. Starting tomorrow, he would show up, not just once, not just when it was easy, but again and again, until Liam and Noah stopped seeing him as a stranger and started seeing him as something closer to a father. And this time, he wouldn't walk away. The morning sunlight spilled across Lucas's bedroom, but he'd been awake for hours. Sleep had been impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Liam and Noah's faces. The weight of the night before still pressed down on him, but beneath it was something else: resolve. He wasn't going to let this truth sit idle. He'd spent too many years avoiding difficult conversations. This time, he was walking straight into one. He dressed differently that morning. No tailored suit, no gleaming cufflinks, just dark jeans, a plain shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He didn't want to look like the corporate figure who had walked away from a marriage and, unknowingly, from 2 sons. He wanted to look like someone who was ready to listen, ready to be present. The drive to Marina's neighborhood felt longer than it was. The closer he got, the more the streets changed. Glass towers giving way to modest houses, busy intersections fading into quieter corners where children rode bikes along cracked sidewalks. He slowed as he approached her house, noting the small garden out front, the wind chimes swaying softly near the porch. He parked and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, steadying his breath. Then he stepped out and walked up to the door. Marina answered after a few knocks, wearing a casual sweater and jeans, her hair tied back, her eyes widened slightly. "Lucas, it's barely 7, I know," he said, "but I couldn't wait. I needed to see you." Her brows drew together. "Why?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because I need you to understand something. I don't want to make up for the past with expensive gifts or grand gestures. I'm not here to swoop in for one dramatic moment and disappear. I want to be here every day I'm allowed to be." She crossed her arms, studying him with the cautious patience of someone who'd heard promises before. "It's not that simple. They don't know you. Trust isn't built in a week." "I know," Lucas said, his voice firm. "That's why I'm not asking for a week. I'm asking for a start. Let me take them out for lunch, watch them play soccer, hear about their day. No expectations beyond that." Marina's eyes softened just a fraction, though suspicion still lingered. "And if they push you away, then I'll come back the next day," he said, no hesitation in his tone. "And the day after that, however long it takes." The quiet stretched between them. Finally, she exhaled. "All right, we'll try. But Lucas, if you hurt them, even once—" "I won't," he interrupted, his voice steady but low. "Not again." Something in her expression shifted. Not full trust, but the smallest crack in the wall she'd kept for years. She stepped back from the door, letting him see the warm, lived-in space behind her. "They'll be home from school at 4. We'll see how it goes." Lucas nodded. "I'll be here." As he turned to leave, he realized this wasn't just a promise to Marina, it was a contract with himself. From this moment forward, he wasn't going to measure success in dollars or deals, but in whether 2 boys, someday, would choose to call him Dad. The following Saturday arrived with skies so clear it felt like the world was offering a fresh page. Lucas stood at the edge of the small neighborhood park, hands in his jacket pockets, scanning the open field. It was nothing like the private clubs and manicured gardens he was used to. The benches were worn, the grass patchy in spots, and the chain-link fence rattled slightly in the breeze. But to him, it felt like the most important place in the city. Marina arrived a few minutes later, walking alongside Liam and Noah. Both boys carried a soccer ball between them, their casual clothes loose and comfortable, sneakers scuffed from use. They weren't tense exactly, but there was a quiet watchfulness in the way they approached, as if they were still deciding how close to let him stand in their space. "Hey," Lucas greeted, keeping his voice light, almost careful. "Thought we could kick the ball around a bit. I'm terrible, but I'll try." Noah smirked. "We'll go easy on you." "Maybe," Liam added, his tone neutral but with a hint of playfulness. They started slow, passing the ball back and forth in wide arcs, Lucas missing more than he connected at first. The boys didn't hide their amusement, and he didn't pretend to be embarrassed. Every mistake gave them an opening to laugh, and he took each one as a gift. Soon, the awkward edges began to smooth. The laughter wasn't forced anymore, and for the first time, Lucas felt like they were seeing him without the label of stranger. After about half an hour, they collapsed on the grass in a loose circle, catching their breath. Lucas handed out bottled water he'd brought, listening as the boys started talking about their week. Noah described a science project involving A homemade volcano. Liam mentioned a soccer match coming up at school. Lucas asked questions, not probing, just enough to show he was interested, and made sure to let them steer the conversation. Marina sat on a nearby bench, watching. At first, her posture was reserved, her hands clasped together, eyes following every interaction. But as the minutes passed, she began to relax. Lucas caught her smiling once, not a broad smile, but one that softened the distance in her gaze. As the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the field, Liam stood and brushed grass from his jeans. "Same time next week?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes giving away a flicker of anticipation. Lucas felt something in his chest loosen. "I'll be here," he said without hesitation. The boys gathered their things, heading toward Marina, who gave Lucas a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that today had gone. Well, it wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something he could build on. Walking back to his car, Lucas realized there hadn't been any grand, cinematic reconciliation, no dramatic speeches, no instant transformation, just a soccer ball, shared laughter, and the first thread of connection beginning to form. It wasn't everything, but it was a start, and this time he wasn't going to let it slip through his